Okay, let's jump right in. Today's explainer is tackling a really fascinating critique of modern American politics, specifically looking at this growing push for a new third party. We are unpacking a source that totally upends how we usually think about the machinery of Washington, D.C. Whether you're a political junkie or you just kind of skim the headlines, this framework is absolutely going to change how you view national elections.
So here's the big question. Can a new political party actually fix Washington? Well, according to the author we're looking at today, the answer completely challenges our most basic assumptions about the federal government. You see, we usually treat political dysfunction like a personnel issue, right? We think if we just vote the right people into the room, maybe a whole new party, the problems will just magically disappear. But this author argues we are completely misdiagnosing the disease. Treating the symptoms with fresh politicians, that's not going to cure a fundamentally broken system.
Let's move into our first section, a new political party, the main meeting, and the push for a third party.
To really understand this, the source highlights a highly publicized, supposedly secret gathering in Maine. It was hosted at Tucker Carlson's home, and the guest list was packed with key MAGA dissidents, folks like Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, Thomas Massie, and Joe Kent. And look, this wasn't just some casual weekend retreat. The agenda was incredibly ambitious. They were actually strategizing to launch a third-party movement on all 50 state ballots. Some were even urging Carlson to mount a presidential run in 2028. So we're talking about a very serious, coordinated effort to just break entirely away from the traditional two-party structure.
Now, what's really interesting here is the core motivation behind this big gathering. It's driven by a profound sense of betrayal. The source notes that figures like Greene and Carlson feel Donald Trump betrayed them, specifically over foreign wars and unfulfilled promises. Basically, they believe the current political vehicle is just broken beyond repair and they desperately need a new path forward. But our author steps back here and offers a massive reality check. They argue that this entire rebellion, as politically explosive and completely captivating it is to watch, kind of misses the forest for the trees.
Which brings us to the next section, Washington's power addiction. An institutional crisis, not a personnel problem. This is where we get into the piece's central and honestly brilliant metaphor. The author compares the federal government's compulsive urge to spend, regulate, and extract to a severe addiction. In this scenario, both major political parties are essentially just acting as enablers. It's exactly like a family dealing with an addict. The family often tricks themselves into believing, if we just do a more forceful intervention, or maybe if we just change the brand of liquor, they'll finally behave. The author argues that dissidents demanding a third party are acting exactly like those enabling family members. They really think a new candidate or a new coalition is going to finally control Washington, but the addiction itself, that remains entirely untouched.
To drive this point home, the author actually borrows Al-Anon's familiar 3 C's for families of alcoholics and translates them perfectly into politics. First, everyday Americans did not cause this massive federal leviathan. Second, you cannot control it just by swapping out one national personality for another. And third, you cannot cure it. Why? Because the institutional incentives, we're talking massive agencies demanding bigger budgets, countless contractors demanding more money, those remain exactly the same. It literally doesn't matter what new political coalition temporarily holds the keys to the kingdom.
So a third party committed to governing the whole country from Washington is really just managing the addiction from the inside. The author puts it perfectly. It would be a new bartender serving drinks in the same house. Think about it. You might change the name of the spending bills, you might change who the political enemies are, but the fundamental assumption that more and more of everyday American life should be dictated from Washington, D.C., that stays completely intact. The core machinery just keeps humming along, running exactly as it was designed to.
Let's look at what the author calls the Mother Teresa test, the impossibility of the American presidency.
342.7 million. The Census Bureau estimates the American population will hit this staggering number by mid-2026. To put that into perspective, the author uses this immense figure to highlight the sheer, incomprehensible scale of the presidency. We are talking about trying to govern a population of this massive magnitude, with all its beautiful complexities and contradictions, from one single centralized office.
The author makes a wild point here. Even if Mother Teresa herself were elected president, she would fail. The scale, the incentives, the sheer institutional momentum would entirely overwhelm her personal character. I mean, just think about the absolutely impossible expectations we place on one single human being. They have to manage an administrative and military apparatus that spans an entire continent.
oversee millions of federal employees and contractors, and somehow try to reconcile local communities that hold radically different, deeply held values. The core problem, according to the source, isn't that we keep electing the wrong national savior. The problem is that we keep searching for one in the first place.
Moving on to a false political binary, breaking the illusion of compulsory unity.
According to the source, this whole push for a new, unified party traps us in a massive failure of political imagination. It presents this false binary. Either we all hold hands and agree on a compulsory, shared national vision, or we just descend into violent dissolution and hatred. But the author asks a really vital question here. Why does a country of 342 million people have to agree on everything? Why do we have to collectively decide how every single local community across a vast continent educates its children or organizes its economy?
This leads to subsidiarity and separation, the missing principles in American politics.
So here's the author's proposed alternative. Subsidiarity. It's a bit of a mouthful, but subsidiarity simply means that higher authority should only step in when local levels cannot adequately address a problem. It's a total paradigm shift. Instead of assuming every single problem requires a sweeping national solution dictated from Washington, subsidiarity demands that we keep authority at the closest practical level to the actual citizens living their lives. It is all about empowering communities rather than centralizing authority. Under this model, the burden of proof always belongs to the people seeking to move power upward. The presumption favors the individual first, then the local town, then the state, and the federal government, that's the absolute last resort. By allowing places like, say, California and Kentucky to govern themselves differently, without imposing their distinct values on one another, political disagreements suddenly become so much more manageable. Not every single question requires one forced answer for the entire country. Which brings us to the ultimate mechanism of accountability: the right to exit. The author asserts that a peaceful society fundamentally relies on the ability of people and communities to literally leave political arrangements that no longer represent them. I mean, think about it. Businesses, churches, neighborhood associations, they all behave much better when people can voluntarily walk out the door, right? The exact same logic applies to governments. Meaningful alternatives create accountability. Exit isn't about rejecting social order at all. It's the exact mechanism that makes a truly voluntary social order possible.
The author makes a pretty chilling observation here. Without exit, politics becomes captivity. Forcing compulsory unity on a deeply divided nation, that only intensifies the brutal conflict over who controls the federal machinery. If you can't leave an arrangement, every single presidential election feels completely existential. Losing doesn't just mean a slightly different tax policy. It means being governed by distant people forcing their preferences onto your community. That is exactly why every election cycle feels like a literal life-or-death struggle for the steering wheel of the entire nation.
As we wrap up, the piece concludes by urging political dissidents to finally stop enabling the addict. The path forward isn't a new national party, it's establishing firm boundaries through decentralization, federalism, and that crucial right to exit. The author argues that withdrawing our emotional investment from the fantasy that Washington can fix everything is the only true path to recovery. Actually, scratch that, it's more than just recovery. Instead of pouring massive amounts of energy into running the exact same broken machine, that same energy could be spent building durable, resilient, and highly customized alternatives at the state and local levels.
I want to leave you with this final thought from the source. Changing the person holding the bottle won't end the addiction. So, is it time to stop fighting for the bottle altogether? If Washington is institutionally incapable of controlling itself, maybe the answer isn't a new political party. Maybe the answer is boundaries. It is a profound challenge to how we think about power in America. Are we ready to stop enabling the system and start demanding the right to govern ourselves locally? Something to think about.